Elena Voss stood frozen outside the great hall doors, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone inside could hear it. In 3 minutes, she would walk into that room and become the wife of a man she had never chosen, a man the whole Northern Territory feared, a man named Cain Thorne. Her father gripped her arm, not gently. "Do not embarrass this family," he whispered. "Everything depends on tonight." Elena wanted to scream that everything already felt broken, but she swallowed the words. She had learned long ago that her feelings did not matter when the survival of an entire pack was at stake. Her home pack, once strong, had grown weak after 2 hard winters and a sickness that took half their hunters. The Northern pack, ruled by Cain Thorne, held the power to save them or destroy them completely. A marriage was the price of peace. She had heard the stories about Cain since she was a child. They said he became alpha at 19 after his older brother died, under strange circumstances that were never fully explained. They said he ruled without mercy, that he never smiled, and that anyone who challenged him regretted it quickly. Some even whispered that his wolf was more dangerous than the man himself, a creature so powerful that even seasoned warriors avoided meeting its eyes. Elena had met him only once, 3 days earlier, when the agreement was signed. He had walked into the meeting room like a shadow crossing a wall, tall and unreadable, his dark eyes sweeping over her for exactly 2 seconds before he turned to speak with her father about borders and debts. He had not said a single word to her, not one, as if she were furniture being moved from one house to another. Now she was expected to marry that same silence. The doors opened, and every face in the Northern Great Hall turned toward her. She had never seen so many wolves gathered in one place, unfamiliar eyes tracking her every step as she moved down the aisle alone, since her father had already taken his seat among the guests of honor, more concerned with appearances than walking his daughter to her fate. Cain stood at the front, waiting, dressed in dark formal clothing that made him look even more severe than she remembered. His jaw was tight. His hands were clasped behind his back like a soldier standing at attention, rather than a groom waiting for his bride. When she reached him, he did not reach for her hand. He simply looked at her, once, then faced forward again. The ceremony passed in a blur of words, Elena barely absorbed. A pack elder spoke about unity and strength, about 2 territories joining as one, about the sacred bond between mates recognized by the old laws. Elena repeated her vows in a voice that did not sound like her own. Cain's voice, when it came, was flat and controlled, giving nothing away. When it was time to exchange the traditional mark, a small symbolic press of claws against the wrist, to seal the union in the old way, Cain hesitated. Just for a moment, Elena almost missed it, but she saw something flicker behind his eyes, something that looked almost like restraint, as if he were holding something back by force of will. Then he completed the mark quickly, efficiently, and stepped away from her the instant it was done. The reception afterward was worse than the ceremony. Elena sat beside her new husband at the head table, while Northern Pack members came forward one by one to offer congratulations that felt more like warnings. An older woman leaned close and murmured, "Be careful tonight, child. His wolf does not know gentleness." A younger warrior smirked and said nothing at all, which somehow felt more threatening than words. Elena caught pieces of conversation throughout the hall, hushed and quick, cutting off whenever she got too close. She heard the name of Cain's brother mentioned more than once, always in tones too careful, too controlled, like people speaking around a wound rather than through it. She wanted to ask someone directly what had truly happened to him, but she was a stranger here, an outsider wearing a stranger's ring, and no one owed her their secrets yet. Cain barely touched his food. He barely looked at her. When guests addressed him, his answers were short, precise, giving away nothing. Elena studied him from the corner of her eye, trying to understand the man she was now bound to for the rest of her life. He did not seem cruel exactly, not in the way the stories described, with cold delight in causing pain. He seemed instead like something wound too tight, like a rope pulled to its very limit, waiting for the moment it might finally break. As the night went on, the drumming began, deep and rhythmic, signaling the traditional dance that new alpha pairs performed before the whole pack. Elena's stomach tightened with dread. She barely knew the steps her own pack used, let alone the northern traditions. Cain rose first, and extended his hand toward her, the first deliberate gesture of kindness, or perhaps simply duty, that he had shown all evening. Elena placed her hand in his, and warmth spread up her arm immediately, unexpected and startling. His hand was rough, calloused from years of training and leading, but his grip was careful, as if he were conscious of his own strength, and determined not to let it show through. They moved through the dance in silence, following the steps other pack members quietly guided them through with small gestures and nods. For a brief moment, when he turned her beneath his arm and drew her back close, Elena looked up and caught his eyes fully for the first time that night. Something passed between them, quick and unreadable, gone before she could name it. His jaw tightened again, and he looked away first. When the dance ended, applause rose through the hall, but Kane did not linger for more celebration. He murmured something to the pack elder standing nearby, then turned to Elena. "It is time," he said. His voice was quiet, but there was no cruelty in it, only exhaustion, as if he had been carrying an invisible weight all evening, and was finally allowed to set it down. Elena's heart climbed into her throat. She had heard enough warnings that day to fill a lifetime, warnings about the wolf inside him, about the wedding night traditions of the North, about things she did not fully understand, but which everyone else seemed to know and fear on her behalf. She followed him out of the hall, down a long corridor lit with warm lanterns, past guards who bowed their heads respectfully as their new alpha's mate walked by. Each step brought her closer to the unknown, to a night she could not predict, married to a man whose true nature she had not yet seen. At the end of the corridor stood a heavy wooden door, carved with symbols of the Northern Pack, the same symbols that now marked her wrist. Kane paused before it, his hand resting against the wood for a moment longer than necessary. "Elena," he said, using her name for the first time all day. It startled her, hearing her own name in his low voice. "Whatever happens tonight, I need you to trust that I will not hurt you." It was such an unusual thing to say, almost a confession disguised as reassurance, that Elena did not know how to respond. Before she could find words, he opened the door and stepped inside, leaving her standing in the hallway, with her heart racing, and countless unanswered questions swirling through her mind. She took a breath, steadied herself as best she could, and followed him inside, unaware that the night ahead would change everything she thought she understood about her new husband, and about the wolf that lived beneath his skin. The room beyond the door was nothing like Elena expected. She had imagined something cold and sparse, matching the reputation of the man she had just married, but instead, she found warmth. A fire crackled low in a stone hearth, casting soft orange light across wooden furniture worn smooth with age. Thick furs covered the floor near the fireplace, and shelves along one wall held books stacked in careful rows, their spines cracked from years of reading rather than decoration. Kane stood near the window with his back to her, staring out at the dark forest beyond the pack grounds. His shoulders were tense, drawn up toward his ears, in a way that made him look less like the fearsome alpha from the stories, and more like a man bracing for something he dreaded. "You can sit," he said without turning around. "I will not touch you tonight unless you wish it." Elena remained standing near the door, unsure whether to trust the offer. "Why not? Isn't that expected?" The pack elders spoke as if tonight mattered greatly. Kane's shoulders tightened further. "Many things are expected of me that I choose not to do." The silence stretched between them, heavy and strange. Elena finally moved further into the room, drawn toward the fire despite her uncertainty, needing something familiar to anchor her in this unfamiliar place. She sat carefully on the edge of a wooden chair near the hearth, watching the flames rather than the man across the room. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. Kane turned slightly, just enough to show he was listening, though his eyes remained fixed somewhere beyond the window. "Everyone speaks about your brother in whispers," Elena continued, choosing her words carefully. "As if his death is something forbidden to mention. What happened to him?" For a long moment, Kane said nothing at all. The fire popped and crackled, filling the silence where his answer should have been. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, quieter, rougher around the edges. "That is not a story for tonight," he said. "Perhaps not for any night." Elena nodded, though disappointment settled in her chest. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that honesty might create some small bridge between two strangers, forced into a lifelong bond. Instead, the walls around him seemed to grow taller with every passing minute. She was about to speak again when something shifted in the air of the room, a change she felt rather than understood. Kane's entire body went rigid. His hands, which had been resting loosely at his sides, curled slowly into fists. A low sound rumbled from deep in his chest, not quite a growl, but something adjacent to it, involuntary and unsettling. "Kane?" Elena rose from her chair, uncertain. "Are you all right?" He did not answer. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear, and his eyes, when he finally turned to face her fully, had changed. The dark brown she remembered had shifted toward something brighter, something almost golden, glowing faintly in the firelight. Elena's breath caught. She had heard of shifters losing partial control before, especially during moments of heightened emotion, but she had never witnessed it happening in front of her. "You should step back," Kane said, his voice strained, layered now with something deeper and rougher beneath the human words. "I am trying to hold him back, but tonight, with the mark completed, with the bond forming, he is stronger than usual." "Who?" Elena asked, though some instinctive part of her already understood. "My wolf," Kane answered through gritted teeth. "He has been trying to reach you since the ceremony ended. I do not know if I can keep him contained much longer." Fear should have flooded through Elena in that moment, every warning she had received throughout the day, rushing back to confirm the danger she now stood before. But strangely, watching him fight so hard to protect her from whatever he believed his wolf might do, she did not feel afraid. She felt something closer to curiosity, and beneath that, an unexpected pull she could not fully explain. "Let him come forward," she said softly. Kane's golden eyes widened in surprise. "You do not understand what you are asking." "Maybe I don't," Elena admitted, "but everyone has told me all day how dangerous you both are supposed to be. I would rather see the truth for myself than spend the rest of my life afraid of shadows and rumors." For a moment, it seemed as though Kane might argue further, might insist she retreat to safety while he fought his own instincts alone in the corner of the room. But something in her steady gaze seemed to reach him, or perhaps the wolf simply grew too strong to resist any longer. His body shuddered, spine curving forward, and the transformation began, smooth and swift, despite the visible strain etched across his face. Elena had seen shifts before, growing up among wolves her entire life, but she had never watched one happen with such restraint, such obvious effort to remain gentle, even in the middle of physical transformation. Where other shifts she witnessed as a child had been sudden and forceful, this one moved slowly, deliberately, as if the man inside were still fighting to control every inch of the change, even as it happened. When it finished, a massive wolf stood where Kane had been only moments before, dark-furred with faint streaks of silver along his back, easily larger than any wolf Elena had encountered among her own pack. His golden eyes fixed on her immediately, intense and unwavering, but there was no aggression in his posture. No bared teeth, no lowered head, signaling a threat. Instead, he simply watched her, ears tilted forward with something that looked remarkably like curiosity, or perhaps even wonder. Elena remained still, unsure what to expect, every warning from the day replaying in her mind, despite her earlier bravery. The wolf took one slow step toward her, then another, his massive paws silent against the fur-covered floor. When he reached her, he did not lunge or growl. He lowered his great head and gently pressed his nose against her hand, a soft, careful touch that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "He recognizes something in you," came Kane's voice, though his mouth had not moved. It seemed to echo somehow from within the wolf's form, as if the man and the creature were momentarily sharing the same space, the same awareness. "I feel it too, but I have been refusing to acknowledge it." "Recognizes what?" Elena whispered, her fingers instinctively moving to stroke the thick fur along the wolf's neck. The wolf leaned into her touch, an action so unexpectedly tender that Elena's chest tightened with emotion she did not fully understand. Whatever answer Kane might have given remained unspoken, because in that moment, something ancient and unspoken passed between wolf and woman. a recognition older than words, older than the political arrangement that had brought them together in the first place. Elena had walked into this marriage believing she was trading her future for her family's survival, expecting nothing but coldness and duty in return. She had not expected this. She had not expected warmth or gentleness, or a wolf who looked at her as though she were something precious, rather than a burden to be managed. Whatever waited for them beyond this night, whatever secrets Cain still guarded so carefully, whatever dangers lurked in the whispered warnings from the wedding guests, Elena understood one thing with sudden, startling clarity. The cruelest alpha in the northern pack was not nearly as simple as his reputation suggested, and neither was the wolf living quietly beneath his skin, waiting patiently for a chance to be understood. The fire crackled softly beside them as the night stretched on, wolf and woman sitting together in comfortable silence, the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but something Elena suspected neither of them would soon be able to walk away from. Outside the window, the northern forest stood dark and endless, beneath a sky full of quiet stars, holding within its shadows secrets about a brother's death, a broken pack, and dangers neither Elena nor Cain could yet imagine, dangers that would test the fragile bond forming between them long before either was ready. For now, though, in the warmth of the fire and the gentle presence of a wolf who refused to be the monster everyone expected, Elena allowed herself, just for a moment, to hope that this forced marriage might become something entirely different than what she had feared walking through those great hall doors. She did not yet know how right and how tested that hope would soon become. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of the Northern Territory house, and Elena woke to find herself alone in the large bed, the space beside her cold and untouched. For a moment, she wondered if the previous night had been some strange dream, the wolf, the gentleness, the quiet understanding that had passed between them. But the faint scent of pine and smoke still clung to the pillow beside her, proof that Cain had been there, close to her, for at least part of the night. She rose and dressed quickly, curious to find him, uncertain what version of her new husband she would meet in the daylight. Would he be the cold, distant man from the ceremony, or would some trace of the gentleness his wolf had shown remain? She found him in a small dining room down the corridor, seated alone at a long table, with a cup of tea untouched in front of him, staring at nothing in particular. When she entered, his shoulders stiffened slightly, and he rose out of habit, gesturing toward the seat across from him. "You slept well?" he asked, his tone careful, almost formal, as though the previous night had never happened. "I did," Elena answered, studying his face for any hint of the softness she had witnessed hours earlier. "Your wolf was very gentle with me." Something flickered across his expression, quickly smoothed away. "He should not have come forward at all. I apologize if it frightened you." "It didn't frighten me," Elena said honestly. "It surprised me. Everyone told me to expect cruelty. Instead, I found something else entirely." Cain's jaw tightened, and he looked away toward the window. "Do not mistake one calm night for the whole truth of who I am, Elena. There are things about me, about this pack, that are far more complicated than a single evening can explain." Before Elena could press further, a sharp knock echoed against the door, and a tall woman entered without waiting for permission, her expression urgent. She wore the insignia of a pack guard, twin blades strapped across her back, and her eyes moved quickly between Cain and Elena before settling on the alpha. "Cain," she said, breathless, "there has been movement along the eastern border. Scouts from the Ashford pack were seen near our lines again last night." Cain's entire posture shifted instantly, the brief softness from moments before vanishing completely, replaced by sharp, controlled focus. "How many?" "At least a dozen," the guard answered. "They did not cross, but they lingered long enough to be noticed. This is the third time this month, Cain." Elena watched the exchange with growing unease. She had heard whispers among the wedding guests about tension along certain borders, rival packs testing weaknesses, old rivalries stirred up by the news of a new alliance forming in the north. She had not realized how immediate and pressing the danger already was. "Gather the border patrol," Cain instructed. "Double the watch tonight. I want reports every few hours until this settles." The guard nodded and left as quickly as she had arrived, leaving a heavier silence behind her. Kane remained standing, his hands braced against the table, tension radiating from every line of his body. "Who are the Ashford pack?" Elena asked carefully. "A territory to the east," Kane answered without looking at her. "They have wanted access to our hunting grounds for years, and they have never hidden their ambition to expand at our expense. Our alliance with your father's pack complicates their plans significantly, which is likely why they are testing our borders now." "Because of me," Elena said quietly, understanding settling uncomfortably in her chest. "Because of the marriage." Kane finally looked at her, and for a brief moment, something almost like reassurance crossed his features. "Because of the alliance, not because of you specifically. Do not carry guilt for decisions that were never yours to make." It was a small kindness, but it landed heavily in Elena's chest, unexpected from a man everyone had warned her would show her nothing but coldness. Over the following days, Elena began to learn the rhythms of her new home, the Northern Territory house far larger and more organized than anything she had known growing up. She met members of the pack slowly, some warm and welcoming, others watchful and reserved, clearly still forming their own opinions about their alpha's new bride. She spent mornings with the pack healer, an older woman named Margaret, who taught her about the herbs and remedies used throughout the North, and afternoons walking the training grounds, watching young pack members practice under careful supervision. Kane remained distant during the day, consumed by border reports and meetings with his advisors, but Elena noticed small things beginning to shift between them. He began seeking her out at meals, asking quiet questions about her life before the marriage, about her own pack's traditions and struggles. He never spoke about his brother again, but Elena noticed the way certain rooms in the house seemed to hold unspoken weight, the way older pack members sometimes went quiet when the topic of the previous alpha arose. One evening, nearly a week into her new life in the North, Elena found herself unable to sleep, the tension of the ongoing border troubles weighing on her mind, despite Kane's assurances that the situation remained under control. She wandered the quiet corridors of the house, eventually finding herself outside a room she had not yet explored, a heavy door slightly ajar at the end of a rarely used hallway. Curiosity pulled her forward, and she pushed the door open gently, finding herself in what appeared to be a preserved bedroom, untouched and carefully maintained, despite clearly not being in current use. Portraits lined the walls, and Elena's breath caught as she recognized the face in several of them, a younger version of Kane standing beside another young man who shared similar features, but carried an entirely different energy, warmer, more open, smiling in every image where Kane's expression remained careful and guarded, even in childhood photographs. That was my brother's room. Elena spun around, startled to find Kane standing in the doorway behind her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. She had not heard him approach. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just exploring and the door was open." Kane stepped into the room slowly, his eyes moving across the portraits with an expression of such deep sorrow that Elena's chest ached simply witnessing it. "No one comes in here anymore. I have not been inside myself in over a year." "You don't have to tell me anything," Elena said gently. "But if you ever want to, I am willing to listen." For a long moment, Kane said nothing, simply staring at the portrait of his brother's smiling face. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a rawness Elena had not heard from him before, stripped of the careful control he maintained in every other interaction. "His name was Aiden," Kane said. "He was supposed to become Alpha, not me. He was better suited for it in every way, kinder, more patient, more loved by this pack than I ever was or ever will be." "What happened to him?" Elena asked softly, though she sensed the answer would be painful. Kane's hands curled into fists at his sides. "A rogue pack attacked our eastern hunting grounds 2 years ago, far more organized and vicious than any rogue group should have been. Aiden was leading the patrol that day. I was meant to be there too, but I was delayed handling a dispute elsewhere in the territory. By the time I arrived, the fighting was nearly finished, and Aiden was already gravely wounded, beyond any healer's ability to save." Elena's heart clenched, imagining the pain buried beneath years of careful control. "He asked me to end his suffering," Kane continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. "The wounds were too severe, and he was in terrible pain with no chance of recovery. I could not bear to watch him suffer longer than necessary, so I honored his final request. Some in the pack never understood the mercy in that choice. They only saw that I was the one who caused his death, and the rumors spread from there, twisted further with each retelling, until the truth became something else entirely. That wasn't murder, Elena said firmly, stepping closer. That was love. That was the hardest kindness anyone could ever be asked to give. Cain looked at her then, something vulnerable flickering behind his careful exterior. You are the first person outside my closest advisors who has ever heard the true story, Elena. I have carried the weight of everyone's assumptions for 2 years without correcting them, because explaining the truth felt like reliving that day over and over again. Thank you for trusting me with it, Elena said quietly. They stood together in the quiet room, surrounded by portraits of a brother lost too soon, and Elena felt something shift permanently between them, a bridge finally forming across the distance that had defined their marriage since its very first moment. Whatever came next, whatever dangers still gathered at their borders, Elena understood now that the man beside her carried far more depth and pain than the cold reputation the world had assigned him. As they finally left the room together, Cain's hand found hers in the darkened hallway, a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes after days of careful distance. Elena held on tightly, sensing that the true story of their marriage was only just beginning to unfold, far more complicated and far more meaningful than either of them could have predicted on their wedding day. Neither of them yet knew that the border tensions with the Ashford pack were about to become far more dangerous than simple scouts testing boundaries, and that the fragile trust they were building together would soon be tested in ways neither could have imagined. 2 weeks after the wedding, Elena had settled into a fragile rhythm within the Northern pack, learning names, learning traditions, and slowly earning small measures of trust from people who had once eyed her with suspicion. But the peace was thin, stretched over growing unease that hummed through the entire territory, like a plucked string that would not stop vibrating. She noticed it first in the way patrol schedules doubled, then tripled. She noticed it in the tired lines forming beneath Cain's eyes as he spent longer hours in meetings with his advisors, returning to their shared quarters later each night, sometimes not until the earliest hours of morning. She noticed it in the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly whenever she entered a room, not out of distrust toward her specifically, she began to realize, but because no one wanted to burden the new alpha's mate with fears they themselves could barely manage. One afternoon, while walking through the training grounds observing a group of young pack members practicing formation drills, Elena spotted a familiar figure approaching, the same guard who had interrupted breakfast weeks earlier with news of the Ashford Scouts. Her name, Elena had since learned, was Wren, one of Cain's most trusted lieutenants, and a woman whose calm exterior rarely cracked, even under pressure. Today, however, Wren's expression carried visible strain. "Lady Elena," she said, using the formal title Elena still had not grown fully accustomed to. "Is the Alpha inside?" "He left for the war room over an hour ago," Elena answered, concern immediately rising. "Has something happened?" Wren hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. "The Ashford pack sent a formal message this morning. They are requesting a meeting at the border, claiming they wish to discuss territorial disputes peacefully." "That sounds like good news," Elena said carefully, though something in Wren's tense posture suggested otherwise. "It could be," Wren admitted. "Or it could be a trap designed to draw our Alpha away from the safety of the packlands. The Ashford leader, Garrick Voss, has never once in his years of leadership sought peaceful resolution to anything. This sudden change feels wrong." Elena's stomach twisted uncomfortably. She excused herself quickly and made her way toward the war room, determined to hear the full situation directly, rather than through second-hand fragments of information. When she arrived, she found Cain surrounded by several advisors, a large map spread across the table before them, markers indicating pack territories, and border points scattered across its surface. Cain looked up as she entered, and though his expression remained composed, Elena had learned to read the subtle tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes that betrayed how deeply this new development troubled him. "You've heard," he said, not a question. "Wren told me about the meeting request," Elena confirmed, moving to stand beside the table. "Are you considering accepting it?" I have little choice, Kane answered, running a hand through his hair in a rare display of visible frustration. If I refuse a peaceful meeting, and word spreads that I turned away diplomacy, it damages our standing with the neutral pacts, whose support we may need if this conflict escalates further. But if I accept, and it is indeed a trap, I risk walking directly into danger. One of the older advisors, a broad-shouldered man named Callum, who had served under Kane's father before him, cleared his throat. There is a middle path, Kane. Accept the meeting, but bring sufficient guard, and choose neutral ground, rather than allowing them to select the location entirely. Kane considered this, his fingers tracing the border lines on the map thoughtfully. I will send word that I accept, on the condition that the meeting takes place at the clearing near Miller's Ridge, equal distance between both territories, with limited guards from each side present to ensure fairness. The advisors began discussing logistics, and Elena listened carefully, absorbing details about the Pact's defensive capabilities, about the history of tension with the Ashford territory that stretched back generations before Kane had ever become Alpha. She learned that Garrick Voss, the Ashford leader, had lost a significant portion of his own hunting grounds decades earlier, during a dispute with Kane's father, a grievance he had apparently never released, passing his resentment down like inherited debt. As the meeting concluded and advisors filed out to begin preparations, Elena remained behind with Kane, watching him study the map with an intensity that suggested he was already 3 steps ahead, planning for outcomes both favorable and disastrous. I want to come with you, she said finally. Kane's head snapped up, surprise evident on his face. Absolutely not. If this is indeed a trap, the border meeting is the last place you should be. And if it isn't a trap, Elena countered, then my presence beside you sends a message too, doesn't it? That this alliance is strong, that I stand fully beside my husband and this pack, not hiding away in safety while others handle the difficult work. Elena, Kane said, his voice softer now, though still firm. I cannot protect you and lead this negotiation simultaneously if something goes wrong. I need to know you are safe within these walls. I understand the risk, Elena said, meeting his gaze steadily. But I did not agree to this marriage, only to spend it hiding whenever difficulty arises. Let me help however I can, even if that simply means standing beside you and showing unity to those who doubt this alliance will last. Kane studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his careful expression, respect mingling with reluctant concern. You are far more stubborn than I expected when we first met. You barely spoke to me when we first met, Elena reminded him, a small smile tugging at her lips despite the tension of the moment. You hardly knew anything about me at all. I am learning quickly, Kane admitted, and for the first time in days, genuine warmth colored his expression, rather than the careful mask he wore for advisors and pack members alike. In the days leading up to the border meeting, preparations intensified throughout the territory. Wren organized the guard rotation with meticulous care, selecting only the most trusted and capable warriors to accompany their alpha to the negotiation. Elena spent hours with Margaret the healer, learning which herbs might prove useful should anything go wrong, packing a small satchel of remedies she insisted on carrying herself, despite gentle protests from the pack members around her. The night before the meeting, Elena found herself unable to sleep once again, her mind cycling through every possible outcome, every danger that might await them at Miller's Ridge. Kane lay beside her in the darkness, equally sleepless, his breathing too controlled to be genuine rest. Tell me about your family, Kane said quietly into the darkness, surprising her with the sudden shift in conversation. You know so much about my past now, about Aiden, about this pack's history. I realize I know very little about the family you left behind. Elena turned toward him, grateful for the distraction from her anxious thoughts. My mother passed when I was young, from an illness the healers never fully understood. My father raised me alone after that, though he was often more focused on pack matters than on parenting. I have one younger brother, Oliver, who remained with our pack when I left for the marriage. He is only 14, still learning what it means to be part of pack leadership someday. Do you miss them? Kane asked. Every day, Elena admitted honestly. Though I understand why the marriage was necessary. Our pack could not have survived another difficult winter without the resources this alliance provides. I do not regret the choice, even though it was not entirely my own to make. Cain was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried unexpected vulnerability. I am grateful you were the one chosen for this alliance, Elena. I did not expect to find comfort in this marriage, given everything my own family has endured. But you have brought something into this house that has been missing for a very long time. Elena reached for his hand in the darkness, finding it easily now, familiar after weeks of small gestures building trust between them. Whatever happens tomorrow, we will face it together. Cain squeezed her hand gently, a silent promise passing between them, and though sleep remained elusive for both of them that night, the quiet comfort of shared understanding eased the weight of uncertainty pressing down on their hearts. Morning arrived too quickly, gray light filtering through the windows as the household stirred into motion, preparing for the journey to Miller's Ridge. Elena dressed carefully, choosing practical clothing rather than anything ceremonial, understanding instinctively that today required readiness rather than appearance. Cain met her in the main hall, dressed similarly, a small blade secured at his hip alongside the composed authority he wore like armor whenever pack business demanded his full attention. Together, surrounded by a carefully selected guard, they set out from the Northern Territory House toward the border, toward a meeting that would determine whether the fragile peace between two rival packs could hold, or whether the tensions simmering beneath the surface for generations were finally about to boil over into something far more dangerous than either of them had prepared for. The journey to Miller's Ridge took most of the morning, the group moving carefully through dense forest paths that Elena had never traveled before. She rode close beside Cain, flanked by Wren and several other trusted guards, everyone alert and watchful despite the outward calm they projected. The forest grew quieter the closer they came to the border, birds falling silent, the air itself seeming to hold its breath in anticipation. When they finally reached the clearing, Elena's chest tightened at the sight awaiting them. The Ashford delegation had already arrived, standing in a loose formation on the opposite side of the meeting ground. At their center stood a broad, weathered man Elena immediately recognized as Garrick Voss from the descriptions she had heard, his gray-streaked hair pulled back severely, his expression carrying none of the warmth that might suggest genuine interest in peaceful resolution. Cain dismounted first, his posture radiating calm authority, despite the visible tension in his jaw. Elena followed, keeping close to his side as they approached the center of the clearing, where the two leaders would formally speak. Wren and the other guards remained at a respectful distance, hands never straying far from their weapons, eyes scanning the surrounding tree line with obvious wariness. Cain Thorne, Garrick said, his voice carrying easily across the clearing, deceptively pleasant, despite the coldness in his eyes. It has been some time since our packs last spoke directly. Garrick, Cain returned evenly, your message suggested you wished to discuss the recent border incidents. I am listening. Garrick's gaze shifted briefly to Elena, assessing her with an expression she found deeply uncomfortable, as though she were a piece on a board rather than a person standing before him. Ah, your new mate. Congratulations on your marriage. Quite convenient timing, wouldn't you say, strengthening your southern alliance just as tensions along our shared border begin to rise? The marriage was arranged before these tensions began, Cain replied, his tone giving nothing away. You did not request this meeting to discuss my personal affairs, Garrick. Speak plainly about what you actually want. A thin smile crossed Garrick's weathered face. Very well, plainly then. My pack has struggled for generations with insufficient hunting grounds, ever since your father claimed territory that many of my elders still believe rightfully belonged to us. I am prepared to formally set aside that old grievance, provided you agree to cede a portion of your eastern lands as compensation. Cain's expression hardened immediately. You are asking me to hand over territory based on a dispute settled decades before either of us led our packs. That is not a peaceful resolution, Garrick. That is an ultimatum dressed in polite language. Call it whatever you wish, Garrick said, his pleasant tone finally slipping to reveal something harder beneath. But consider carefully before you refuse. My pack has grown considerably stronger in recent years, and patience among my warriors is wearing thin. I would rather resolve this through discussion than through conflict, but I assure you, we are prepared for either outcome. Elena felt Cain's tension radiating beside her, though his outward composure never wavered. I will not surrender territory that belongs to this pack, based on threats disguised as negotiation. If you wish to discuss legitimate border adjustments through proper channels involving neutral pack elders as witnesses, I remain open to that conversation. But I will not be pressured into concessions through implied threats in an isolated clearing. Garrick's expression darkened, the pleasant mask falling away entirely. You always were stubborn, much like your father before you. Very well, Kane. I gave you the opportunity for peaceful resolution. Do not say I failed to offer it. The air in the clearing shifted immediately, tension crackling like static before a storm. Elena's heart began pounding as she noticed movement in the tree line beyond the Ashford delegation, shapes shifting among the shadows that had not been visible moments before. Wren noticed simultaneously, her hand moving instinctively toward her weapon while calling a quiet warning toward the northern guards. Kane, Elena said urgently, gripping his arm. There are more of them hidden in the trees. Kane's eyes swept the tree line, confirming what Elena had already sensed. Additional Ashford warriors positioned strategically around the clearing, far more than the agreed-upon limited guard the negotiation terms had specified. Garrick had never intended a fair meeting at all. You brought far more than the agreed number, Kane said, his voice dangerously low now, all traces of diplomatic patience gone. Garrick shrugged, unbothered by being caught in his deception. Precautions seemed wise, given your reputation, Kane. Surely you understand. Before further words could be exchanged, one of the hidden Ashford warriors emerged from the tree line, moving quickly toward the northern guards positioned near the clearing's edge. Wren reacted instantly, shouting commands that sent the northern delegation into immediate defensive formation. Guards moving to encircle Kane and Elena protectively, while remaining alert to threats from multiple directions. Elena's training instincts, honed through years growing up within her own pack, kicked in despite her fear. She moved closer to Kane, rather than retreating, understanding that scattering would only make them more vulnerable to whatever Garrick had planned. This was never about peaceful discussion, Kane said, positioning himself protectively in front of Elena, while keeping his eyes fixed on Garrick. You intended this ambush from the very beginning. Consider it motivation, Garrick replied coldly. Perhaps facing genuine consequences will convince you to reconsider my earlier offer. The clearing erupted into controlled chaos as additional Ashford warriors emerged from their hidden positions, though Elena noticed with some relief that neither side seemed eager to escalate into full violence immediately. Both groups instead engaged in tense posturing, weapons drawn but not yet used, each side clearly gauging the other's willingness to actually follow through on the implied threat. Wren moved swiftly to Kane's other side, her voice low and urgent. We are outnumbered here, Kane. I count at least 20 additional warriors beyond what was agreed. Kane's jaw tightened, calculating their options with the same sharp focus Elena had witnessed during their earlier war room meetings. We retreat toward the northern tree line, maintaining formation. Garrick will not risk open conflict on contested ground where witnesses from neutral packs could easily learn the truth of what happened here today. As if sensing the shift in northern strategy, Garrick raised a hand, signaling his warriors to hold their positions rather than advance further. Leaving so soon, Kane? I thought you wished to discuss peaceful resolution. There is nothing peaceful about ambushing a negotiation with hidden warriors, Kane replied, beginning the careful retreat toward safer ground, while never taking his eyes off the Ashford leader. This meeting is finished, Garrick. Know that this deception will not be forgotten. The northern delegation retreated in careful formation, guards maintaining protective positions around both Kane and Elena as they moved back toward the tree line and eventually toward their waiting horses. Elena's heart continued pounding long after they had put sufficient distance between themselves and the tense clearing, adrenaline coursing through her system as the reality of how close the situation had come to genuine violence finally settled in. Once they were safely within the boundaries of Northern Territory again, Kane called an immediate halt, dismounting quickly to check that everyone in their party remained unharmed. When he turned to Elena, his composed exterior finally cracked, revealing the fear he had carefully hidden throughout the confrontation. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, his hands moving to check her over, despite her reassurances. "I'm fine," Elena said, though her voice trembled slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline. "Kane," That was never going to be a peaceful meeting. He planned that ambush from the very beginning. I know, Kane said grimly, his expression hardening with barely contained anger. And now we understand clearly what we are truly facing. Garrick does not want peaceful resolution. He wants our territory, and he is prepared to take considerable risks to claim it. Wren approached, her own expression tense with the seriousness of what had just transpired. Kane, this changes everything. If Garrick was willing to bring that many warriors to a supposedly peaceful negotiation, he is preparing for genuine conflict, not simply testing our borders as we initially assumed. Then we prepare as well, Kane said, determination replacing the momentary fear Elena had glimpsed. Double the guard along every border point immediately. I want scouts monitoring Ashford movement continuously, and send word to the neutral packs about what transpired today. If Garrick intends to escalate this conflict, I want every ally we can gather standing beside us when he does. As the party continued their journey back toward the safety of the Northern Territory house, Elena found herself riding close beside Kane once again, the earlier warmth between them now tempered by the sobering reality of the danger they faced. She reached for his hand, finding it tense despite his outward composure. We will get through this, she said quietly, echoing the promise she had made the night before their journey to Miller's Ridge. Kane glanced at her, something fierce and protective burning behind his eyes. I will not allow Garrick or anyone else to threaten this pack. Or you, Elena. Whatever preparations must be made, whatever difficult decisions lie ahead, I promise you we will face them together. As they rode deeper into the safety of Northern Territory, Elena understood with growing clarity that the fragile peace she had hoped for when arriving in the North weeks earlier had been nothing more than an illusion. Real conflict was coming, dangerous and unavoidable, and the bond forming between herself and Kane would soon be tested far beyond the quiet moments of trust they had built together in the privacy of their shared home. The Northern Pack was preparing for war, and Elena, whether she had chosen this path or not, now stood firmly at the center of it, determined to protect the home and the husband she had come to care for, far more deeply than she ever expected when she first walked through those great hall doors. In the days following the failed negotiation at Miller's Ridge, the Northern Territory transformed into something Elena had never witnessed before, a household and pack shifting entirely into preparation mode. Guards drilled from dawn until dusk on the training grounds. Scouts departed in rotating shifts, returning with updates about Ashford movement along the eastern border. Advisors filled the war room almost constantly now, maps covered with new markers, indicating potential defensive positions and possible points of attack. Elena found herself drawn increasingly into these preparations, no longer content to remain a passive observer while the pack she now called home braced for potential conflict. She spent hours with Margaret the healer, learning advanced techniques for treating injuries that might arise during actual fighting, expanding far beyond the basic remedies she had known before arriving in the North. She also began working alongside Wren, who taught her sharper defensive techniques than the ones she had learned as a child, understanding that whatever came next, Elena needed to be capable of protecting herself and others if the situation demanded it. Kane noticed her growing involvement with a mixture of pride and concern that played across his features whenever their paths crossed during the busy days. One evening, finding a rare quiet moment together, after another long day of preparations, he watched her practicing simple defensive movements Wren had taught her in the corner of their shared quarters, a small smile tugging at his lips, despite the seriousness of everything surrounding them. "You continue to surprise me," he said, settling into a chair near the fire, exhaustion evident in the tired lines around his eyes. Elena paused her practice, moving to sit beside him instead. "I refuse to be someone who simply waits helplessly while others fight to protect what we have built here." "What we have built," Kane repeated softly, something warm passing behind his eyes despite the weariness. "A few weeks ago, I never imagined I would think of this marriage in those terms." "Neither did I," Elena admitted, reaching for his hand, "but here we are." Their quiet moment was interrupted by an urgent knock at the door, Wren entering quickly with an expression that immediately signaled trouble. "Kane, one of our scouts just returned. Ashford warriors were spotted moving in significant numbers toward our eastern hunting grounds. far closer to our actual pack lands than any previous incursion. Kane rose immediately, all traces of the earlier softness replaced by sharp alertness. How many? And how far? At least 30 warriors, Ren reported grimly. Perhaps 2 hours from our border if they maintain their current pace. They're testing whether we will respond with force or continue trying diplomatic solutions, Kane said, already moving toward the door, gathering his composure into the focused authority Elena had come to recognize as his leadership presence. Gather the response team immediately. I want a show of strength significant enough to discourage further incursion, but I do not want this to escalate into open conflict if it can be avoided. Elena rose as well, determination settling firmly across her features. I'm coming with you. Elena, Kane began, the familiar protest rising automatically. I've been training with Ren for days now, Elena interrupted firmly. I can help with wounded if fighting occurs. And my presence alongside you continues to demonstrate the strength of our alliance to anyone watching, including our own pack members who still harbor doubts about this marriage. Kane studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing his instinct to protect her against the validity of her argument. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and decisive. You stay close to Ren at all times. If fighting breaks out, you retreat immediately to safety. Do you understand? I understand, Elena agreed, though privately, she was uncertain whether she could truly stand back and retreat if people she had come to care for were in genuine danger. The response team assembled quickly, dozens of warriors gathering with practiced efficiency that spoke to the rigorous training the Northern Pack maintained, even during peaceful times. Elena rode alongside Ren near the rear of the formation, watching Kane lead the group with commanding presence, his earlier vulnerability completely submerged beneath the authority required of an alpha facing potential conflict. They reached the eastern hunting grounds as the sun began sinking toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the contested territory. The Ashford warriors had already arrived, spread out along the border in a formation that suggested calculated intimidation, rather than genuine intention to cross into northern lands immediately. Kane rode forward alone, positioning himself at the front of the northern formation with obvious authority. You are trespassing on northern territory, he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the tense space between the two groups. Withdraw now, or face the consequences of that decision. A warrior at the front of the Ashford group, clearly serving as their field commander rather than Garrick himself, called back with obvious defiance. We are simply exercising our right to hunt in disputed territory. Your claim to these lands has never been formally settled, Kane Thorne. This territory has belonged to the Northern Pack for 3 generations, Kane replied, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. There is nothing disputed about it except in Garrick's imagination. Withdraw immediately. The tension stretched tight as both sides remained motionless, each waiting to see who would make the first move. Elena's heart pounded as she watched from her position near the rear, Ren tense beside her, hand resting near her weapon despite the distance separating them from the potential conflict. Finally, after several agonizing moments, the Ashford commander raised his hand, signaling his warriors to begin a slow, deliberate retreat back across the border, though his expression made clear this was merely a temporary concession, rather than genuine surrender. This is not finished, Kane Thorne, the commander called as his warriors withdrew. Garrick's patience grows thinner each day. Consider this a warning of what continued refusal will bring. As the Ashford warriors disappeared back across the border into their own territory, tension slowly began releasing from the northern formation, though Kane's expression remained grim as he turned his horse back toward his own warriors. They will return, he said quietly to Ren, as Elena approached, having moved closer once the immediate danger had passed. This was merely a demonstration, testing our resolve before whatever Garrick actually intends to attempt. What do you think he's planning? Elena asked, genuine worry coloring her voice. Kane's jaw tightened. I fear he intends something more significant than simple border incursions. Perhaps a direct attempt to seize territory through force, calculating that our alliance with your Southern Pack has not yet had time to fully solidify into meaningful military support. The ride back to the Northern Territory House passed in tense silence, everyone processing the reality that peaceful resolution seemed increasingly unlikely. That night, After the exhausted response team had finally dispersed to rest, Kane called an emergency meeting with his closest advisors, Elena included. Despite the surprised glances some of the older advisors exchanged at her presence in what had previously been an exclusively male-dominated space. "We need reinforcements," Kane said, addressing the gathered group with grim determination. "I want messages sent immediately to Elena's father's pack, formally requesting the military support promised as part of our alliance agreement. We also need to reach out to any neutral packs who might be willing to send additional warriors, given what Garrick attempted at Miller's Ridge." Callum, the older advisor who had served under Kane's father, spoke up thoughtfully. "The neutral packs will want assurance that supporting us will not draw them into unnecessary conflict, Kane. We will need compelling evidence of Garrick's aggression to convince them this is worth the risk." "Then we provide that evidence," Kane said firmly. "Ren, I want detailed reports compiled from every border incident, every incursion, everything documented clearly enough that no neutral pack could reasonably doubt the threat we face." As the meeting continued late into the night, strategies forming and messages being drafted for allies both near and distant, Elena found herself contributing more than she initially expected, her fresh perspective as someone recently arrived from outside the Northern Pack, proving valuable in identifying potential blind spots in their defensive planning. Later, as exhaustion finally began claiming everyone present, Kane dismissed the meeting, advisors filing out to begin their assigned tasks, while Elena remained behind, watching him study the increasingly cluttered war room map with visible weariness weighing heavily across his shoulders. "You should rest," Elena said gently, moving to stand beside him. "I cannot afford rest right now," Kane replied, though his exhaustion was evident in every word. "Too much depends on the decisions we make in these coming days." Elena reached for his hand, drawing his attention away from the map for just a moment. "You cannot lead effectively if you exhaust yourself completely before the true conflict even begins, Kane. Come rest, even briefly. This pack needs you at your strongest, when Garrick finally makes his true move." Kane's expression softened slightly, some of the rigid tension easing from his shoulders, as he allowed her gentle insistence to guide him away from the war room and toward their quarters. As they walked together through the quiet corridors of the sleeping household, Elena felt the weight of everything ahead pressing heavily against her chest, uncertainty about what dangers still awaited them, about whether the fragile alliances they were building would prove strong enough when true conflict finally arrived. But beside her, walking close enough that their shoulders brushed with each step, Kane's presence offered a strange comfort, despite the mounting dangers surrounding them both. Whatever Garrick ultimately intended, whatever true conflict lay ahead for the Northern Pack, Elena understood with growing certainty that she would face it standing firmly beside the man she had once feared marrying, now someone she could not imagine facing an uncertain future without. The response from Elena's father arrived 4 days later, carried by a tired messenger who had ridden through the night without rest. Elena watched Kane's face as he read the letter, hope rising briefly before settling into something more complicated as he finished the message and handed it to her without a word. Her father had agreed to send warriors, but far fewer than the alliance agreement had promised, citing continued weakness within his own pack following the harsh winters and illness that had plagued them before the marriage was arranged. Reading between the careful diplomatic language, Elena understood the painful truth. Her father's pack simply did not have sufficient strength left to offer the meaningful support Kane desperately needed. "This is not enough," Kane said quietly, though there was no accusation in his voice, only weary acceptance of yet another obstacle in their path. "I'm sorry," Elena said, guilt settling heavily in her chest, despite Kane's earlier reassurance that the conflict was not her fault. "My father should have been honest about his pack's limitations before agreeing to this alliance in the first place. He was likely desperate for the protection this marriage offered his own people," Kane said, understanding rather than anger coloring his tone. "I cannot fault him for prioritizing his pack's survival, even if it leaves us with fewer resources than we hoped." Ren, who had been present when the message arrived, spoke up thoughtfully. "What about the neutral packs, Kane? Have any responded to our requests?" "Two have agreed to send limited support," Kane answered, some cautious optimism entering his voice for the first time in days. "The Hartley pack to the west has offered 20 warriors, and the Ridgeway Pack has agreed to send additional scouts to help monitor Ashford movement across a wider area. It's a start, Elena offered, though everyone in the room understood it remained insufficient against the numbers Garrick appeared to be gathering. Over the following week, tensions along the border continued escalating steadily. Scout reports indicated Ashford warriors massing in greater numbers near several key points along the shared boundary, clearly preparing for something more significant than the testing incursions they had attempted previously. Kane spent increasingly long hours coordinating with his advisors and the arriving reinforcements, exhaustion carving deeper lines into his face with each passing day. Elena, meanwhile, found herself taking on greater responsibility within the pack, organizing the healers and preparing supplies that would be needed if actual conflict erupted. Margaret praised her quick learning and steady hands, noting that Elena possessed a natural aptitude for healing work that many trained practitioners took years to develop. One afternoon, while Elena was cataloging medical supplies in the pack's storage building, a young pack member burst through the door, breathless with urgency. "Lady Elena, you're needed immediately. There's been an incident at the Eastern Watchtower." Elena's heart lurched as she rushed to follow, her mind racing through worst possible scenarios during the short journey to the watchtower. When she arrived, she found a cluster of pack members gathered around a young guard, barely more than a boy, clutching his arm where blood had soaked through his sleeve. "What happened?" Elena demanded, immediately moving to examine the wound while others cleared space around them. "Ashford scouts," the injured guard managed through gritted teeth. "They came close to the tower, closer than ever before. When I tried to signal an alarm, one of them attacked before retreating back across the border." Elena worked quickly, applying the techniques Margaret had taught her to clean and bind the wound, relief washing through her when she confirmed the injury, while painful, was not life-threatening. As she finished tending to the young guard, she noticed Kane arriving at the scene, his expression darkening as he took in the situation. "This is the first time they've actually made contact, rather than simply testing our borders," Kane said grimly, kneeling beside the injured guard to check on him personally. "Garrick is escalating faster than we anticipated." "How is he?" Kane asked, looking toward Elena for her assessment. "He'll recover," Elena confirmed. "The wound is painful, but not deep. He was fortunate the attacker chose to retreat, rather than pressing the advantage." Kane nodded, though the grim set of his jaw suggested he understood. This was merely a preview of greater dangers still to come. He rose and addressed the gathered pack members, his voice carrying the weight of leadership even in this moment of crisis. "Increase the watch at every tower immediately. No one patrols alone from this point forward. I want pairs at minimum, and I want immediate reporting of any Ashford presence, no matter how minor it might seem." As the pack members dispersed to implement his instructions, Kane turned to Elena, exhaustion and worry mingling openly across his features, now that the immediate crisis had passed. "This is only the beginning, isn't it?" "I believe so," Elena admitted honestly. "But we are more prepared than we were even a week ago, Kane. The pack is organized, the healers are ready, and reinforcements continue arriving. Whatever Garrick attempts next, we will not face it unprepared." That evening, as the household settled into an uneasy quiet following the day's disturbing events, Elena found Kane standing alone on the balcony outside their quarters, staring out toward the dark tree line that marked the eastern border. She joined him quietly, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool night air. "I keep thinking about Aiden," Kane said softly, not turning to look at her. "About how unprepared we were when the rogue attack happened 2 years ago. I promised myself after that day I would never again allow this pack to face danger without proper preparation. Yet here we are, watching history threaten to repeat itself." "This is different," Elena said gently, moving to stand beside him. "You learned from what happened before, Kane. Look at everything you've built since then. The training, the alliances, the careful preparation your advisors have implemented under your leadership. You are not the same Alpha who lost his brother to an unexpected attack. You have grown into someone far more capable of protecting this pack." Kane finally turned to look at her, something raw and vulnerable passing across his features in the moonlight. "I could not bear losing anyone else I care about, Elena. Not this pack, not the people who depend on my leadership, and especially not you." The admission hung in the air between them, quiet but significant. The first time Cain had openly acknowledged the depth of feeling that had grown between them since their forced marriage began. Elena reached for his hand, holding it firmly. "You won't lose me," she said softly. "And you won't lose this pack either. We will face whatever comes together, exactly as we have been facing everything since Miller's Ridge." Cain's other hand rose to gently cup her face, his expression filled with an emotion that needed no further words to explain. "When this began, I never imagined I would come to feel this way about the woman circumstances forced me to marry. But watching you these past weeks, your courage, your compassion toward this pack, your willingness to stand beside me even when danger threatens everything we've built together, I find myself grateful every single day that fate chose you for this alliance." Elena's heart swelled with emotion, the careful walls she had maintained since arriving in the north, finally crumbling entirely in this quiet moment of vulnerability. "I feel the same way, Cain. What began as an arrangement neither of us chose has become something I never want to lose." As they stood together on the balcony, the weight of the coming conflict still heavy around them, they found comfort in each other's presence, a bond forged not through the forced circumstances of their marriage, but through weeks of shared struggle, honest conversation, and growing trust that had transformed strangers into true partners. Somewhere beyond the dark tree line, Garrick Voss continued gathering his forces, preparing for whatever final move he intended to make against the northern pack. But within the walls of their shared home, Cain and Elena stood united, ready to face whatever conflict lay ahead, strengthened by a connection that had grown far deeper than either had anticipated when their forced marriage began weeks earlier. The following morning brought word that would finally reveal the true scale of the threat gathering against them, news that would push the northern pack into its most dangerous confrontation yet, one that would test everything Cain and Elena had built together since that first uncertain wedding night. Wren arrived at their quarters before sunrise, her expression grave enough that Elena knew immediately something significant had happened. "Cain, our furthest scouts just returned. Garrick has gathered nearly his entire pack near the eastern border, far more warriors than we ever anticipated. They are moving into position as we speak." Cain was already dressing, his movements sharp and efficient despite the early hour. "How long until they reach our lands?" "By midday, if they maintain their current pace," Wren answered. "This is not another testing incursion, Cain. This is a full assault." Elena's heart raced as she rose as well, understanding immediately that the moment they had been preparing for had finally arrived. "What do we do?" Cain turned to her, his expression a careful mixture of determination and lingering concern for her safety. "We gather every warrior we have, including our reinforcements from the Hartley and Ridgeway packs. We position our defenses at the strongest natural choke points along our border, using the terrain to our advantage, rather than meeting them in open ground where their greater numbers would matter more significantly." Within an hour, the entire Northern Territory House had transformed into a hub of urgent activity. Warriors gathered their weapons and armor, checking equipment with the careful precision of those who understood their lives might depend on every detail being correct. Healers organized their supplies near the training grounds, preparing a treatment area close enough to the coming conflict to provide swift aid, but positioned safely behind the defensive lines. Elena found herself moving between groups, offering encouragement to nervous younger pack members, double-checking medical supplies with Margaret, and finally making her way to where Cain stood at the center of the war room, coordinating final preparations with his advisors and the visiting warriors from allied packs. "The Hartley warriors will position themselves along the northern flank," Cain instructed, pointing to specific locations on the increasingly detailed map spread across the table. "Ridgeway forces will hold the southern approach. Our own warriors will form the primary defensive line at the central choke point near Miller's Ridge, using the natural terrain advantage the narrow passage provides." Callum studied the plan carefully before nodding his approval. "This gives us the best possible chance despite our numerical disadvantage, Cain. Garrick will be forced to funnel his warriors through the narrow passage, negating much of the advantage his greater numbers would otherwise provide." As the final preparations concluded, Cain called the assembled warriors together, his voice carrying clearly across the training grounds where hundreds of pack members and allied warriors had gathered, awaiting his words, before departing for what many understood might become the most significant battle the Northern Pack had faced in generations. Today, Garrick Voss brings his forces against our lands, believing our alliance too fragile, our resolve too weak, to properly defend what belongs to us, Cain said, his voice steady and commanding despite the gravity of the moment. He is wrong. This pack has faced hardship before and emerged stronger. We have built alliances not through weakness, but through genuine partnership and mutual respect, exactly the qualities Garrick's forced aggression can never hope to match. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the gathered warriors with obvious pride and determination. We do not fight today for conquest or expansion. We fight to protect our homes, our families, and everything generations before us worked to build. Stand firm today, trust in your training, trust in each other, and we will show Garrick Voss exactly why the Northern Pack has endured for generations, despite every challenge sent against it. A rallying cheer rose from the assembled warriors, determination replacing earlier nervousness as Cain's words settled into their hearts. Elena watched from near the edge of the crowd, pride swelling in her chest at witnessing the leader Cain had become, so different from the cold, distant stranger she had married weeks earlier. As the warriors began organizing into their assigned positions, Cain made his way toward Elena, his expression softening briefly from the commanding authority he had projected moments before. Stay with Margaret and the healers, close enough to help if needed, but far enough back to remain safe. Promise me. I promise, Elena said, though her heart ached at the thought of watching him ride into potential danger. She reached up, pulling him into a fierce embrace. Come back to me, Cain. I will, he promised, his voice rough with emotion despite his outward composure. This is not goodbye, Elena. This is simply what must be done to ensure we have a future together worth protecting. With one final look, filled with everything neither of them had time to properly express, Cain turned and mounted his horse, riding toward the front of the assembled warriors as they began their march toward Miller's Ridge, toward the confrontation that would determine the fate of the Northern Territory. The hours that followed passed with agonizing slowness for Elena, waiting alongside Margaret and the other healers at the treatment area, positioned safely behind the defensive lines. Distant sounds occasionally carried on the wind, difficult to distinguish clearly, but unmistakably signaling that fighting had begun at the choke point where Cain's forces awaited Garrick's advancing warriors. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, the first wounded began arriving, carried by fellow warriors, or supported by comrades, as they retreated briefly from the front lines for treatment. Elena threw herself into the work immediately, grateful for the training Margaret had provided over the preceding weeks, treating wounds with steady hands, despite the fear gnawing constantly at her heart for Cain's safety. A young warrior from the Hartley pack, his arm badly injured, gritted his teeth as Elena worked to clean and bind the wound. The northern flank is holding, he reported between pained breaths. Garrick underestimated how well prepared we were for this attack. And the central position? Elena asked urgently, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Where Cain is leading the defense. Still holding, when I was called back for treatment, the warrior confirmed. Your Alpha fights with incredible skill, my lady. Garrick's forces have made no progress breaking through, despite repeated attempts. Relief flooded through Elena, though it remained tempered by continued anxiety as the fighting stretched on through the afternoon. More wounded arrived periodically, and Elena worked tirelessly alongside Margaret and the other healers, treating injuries ranging from minor cuts to more serious wounds that required careful attention to prevent complications. As evening approached, casting long shadows across the treatment area, a messenger arrived at full gallop, dismounting quickly and rushing toward where Elena and Margaret continued their work. The central line is weakening, he reported breathlessly. Garrick has personally joined the fighting, pushing harder than anyone anticipated. Cain needs reinforcements immediately, or the choke point may not hold much longer. Elena's blood ran cold at the news. What reinforcements remain available? Only the reserve warriors held back at the Territory House, the messenger answered. But they will not reach the front lines quickly enough given the current distance. Without hesitation, Elena made a decision that surprised even herself. I know these lands well enough now from my training with Ren. I can guide the reserve warriors along a faster route through the Eastern Trail, cutting significant time from their journey to to reinforce the central position. Margaret's eyes widened with concern. Elena, that trail runs dangerously close to the fighting itself. Then we move quickly and carefully, Elena said firmly, already moving to gather her things. Cain needs those reinforcements, Margaret. I cannot simply wait here while he faces danger I might be able to help prevent. Within minutes, Elena found herself riding alongside the reserve warriors, guiding them along the eastern trail she had learned during her weeks of exploring the northern territory with Ren. The sounds of fighting grew louder as they approached, the clash of weapons and shouted commands, carrying clearly on the evening air, confirming the messenger's report that the situation at the central choke point had grown dire. They emerged from the trail directly behind the northern defensive line, and Elena's heart nearly stopped at the sight before her. Cain fought at the very center of the fiercest fighting, his movements sharp and controlled despite obvious exhaustion, holding his position against Garrick himself, who fought with brutal determination that spoke to years of accumulated resentment finally being released. The arrival of reserve warriors provided exactly the boost the northern forces needed. Fresh energy surged through the defensive line as reinforcements joined the fighting, pushing back against the Ashford advance with renewed strength. Elena remained at the rear with the medical supplies she had brought, treating wounded warriors as they were pulled back from the fighting, but her eyes remained fixed on Cain throughout, watching anxiously as he continued his intense confrontation with Garrick. The battle reached its climax as Cain, drawing on reserves of strength and determination that seemed to flow from somewhere deep within him, finally gained the advantage against Garrick, disarming him through a combination of skill and sheer force of will. With Garrick defeated, and his warriors witnessing their leader's clear failure, the Ashford forces began a chaotic retreat, their earlier confidence shattered by the unexpected strength of the northern defense. As the fighting finally subsided, Cain stood amid the aftermath, breathing heavily but very much alive, and Elena's relief was so overwhelming that she found herself running forward without conscious thought, weaving through the gradually calming chaos to reach him. Cain turned just as she arrived, and whatever exhaustion weighed on him vanished momentarily as he pulled her into a fierce embrace, both of them trembling with the aftermath of fear and relief mingling together. "You should not have come this close to the fighting," he said, though his voice carried no true anger, only overwhelming relief that she was safe. "I couldn't wait behind while you needed reinforcements," Elena said, tears finally falling freely now that the immediate danger had passed. "I had to help however I could, Cain." "You saved this battle," Cain said softly, cupping her face gently. "Your knowledge of the terrain, your quick decision to guide the reserves, it made all the difference in turning back Garrick's forces before they could break through our line." In the days following the battle, formal terms were established with what remained of Garrick's leadership, terms that firmly established the Northern Pact's territorial boundaries while ensuring the conflict would not simply reignite in future years. Garrick himself, defeated and humiliated, agreed to step down from leadership, with a more reasonable member of his pack taking his place, someone genuinely interested in peaceful coexistence rather than inherited grievances passed down through generations. The Northern Territory House slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, though everyone who had lived through the conflict carried the experience with them, understanding more deeply than ever the value of the peace they had fought so hard to secure. Elena found herself celebrated throughout the pack for her contributions during the battle, no longer viewed as merely a political bride brought north through arranged circumstances, but as a genuine and valued member of the pack in her own right. One evening, weeks after the conflict had finally resolved, Elena found Cain standing once again on their balcony, though this time his expression carried none of the earlier tension and worry that had defined so many of their previous conversations in that same spot. Instead, peace and contentment softened his features as he watched the sunset paint the Northern Territory in warm golden light. "I have been thinking," he said, as she joined him, wrapping his arm naturally around her shoulders, a gesture that had become comfortable and familiar between them over the preceding weeks, "about how differently everything unfolded from what either of us expected when this marriage was first arranged. I remember standing outside the great hall doors, terrified of the man I was about to marry," Elena admitted, leaning into his warmth. "Everyone spoke of your cruelty, your coldness. I never imagined I would come to find such genuine partnership and love with you instead. Nor did I imagine I would find someone who could see past the reputation this pack's tragedies had built around me," Kane replied softly. "You brought warmth back into my life, Elena, into this entire pack, in ways I never thought possible after losing Aiden." Elena turned to face him fully, her heart full with everything they had built together since that uncertain wedding night weeks earlier. What began as an arrangement neither of us chose became something far more meaningful than either of us dared hope for. "The cruelest alpha in the Northern Pack," Kane said with a small, genuine smile, using the very title that had once caused Elena such fear. "I suppose that reputation no longer fits quite so well anymore." "It never truly did," Elena said gently. "I saw the truth of who you really were on our wedding night, when your wolf refused to be anything other than gentle with me, despite everything the stories claimed you would become." As the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, casting the Northern Territory into the soft darkness of evening, Kane pulled Elena closer, their bond stronger now than either could have imagined during those first uncertain days of their forced marriage. Together, they had faced betrayal, conflict, and genuine danger, emerging not just as political allies bound by arrangement, but as true partners bound by love, respect, and the deep understanding that had grown between them through every trial they had overcome together. The Northern Pack, once feared and uncertain under the shadow of Kane's carefully guarded reputation, now stood united and strong, led by an alpha pair whose genuine partnership had become the very foundation the entire territory could rely upon for generations to come. What had begun as a forced marriage, born from political necessity, had transformed into something neither Elena nor Kane had dared hope for. A true and lasting love, discovered in the most unexpected of circumstances, forged through hardship into something unbreakable.